Hey, hello. Welcome back to Separator for AWS online training. We're about to start session number 12, Firewall Configuration for support PBX extra features. Um, let's move on. Uh, when you're doing deployments with remote use of remote extensions, uh, on top of the traditional support for SIP traffic between the phones and the PBX, there are some other additional functionalities that sometimes doesn't are not built on top of SIP, um, such as, for example, uh, provisioning the phones, um, um, XMPP support for uh, instant messaging or things like that. So we're using, in our case, just as an example, um, and this may be different from vendor to vendor, we are using um, free PBX. And the first step, usually you have to double check with your PBX vendor which additional ports are needed for all these non-SIP services, um, including accessing um, client applications on the server. So we have this table here showing the typical ports that are used for some of the PBX functionalities. For example, web management, web secure management, uh, user web access for um, client applications, soft clients, operator panels, uh, what else? XMPP for instant messaging, FTP, TFTP for provisioning, HTTPS provisioning, HTTP provisioning, etc. So let's assume just that those are the ports used, and this, as I said, this could be different from vendor to vendor. So if you remember, in one of the previous sessions, we enable the firewall mode um, for separator. So once you do that, one of the things that happen is this option here, rules and relays, appear on the web, on the GUI, and this specific section doesn't show up if you are not uh, using the firewall mode. So once you have this enabled, you're gonna have two important tags here: the rules tag and the relay tag. The rules tag is gonna help us on defining which flows are allowed from interface to interface, from network to network, etc. But the important one here is the relays. The relays are the ones that will allow you to map specific ports received on the public side of the SBC, and how they are going to be forwarded to the the PBX. So if you remember, our PBX is in 10.0.1.149, and we are receiving on Internet 0 all the traffic coming from the Internet. Okay, so you just need to map based on this table that we have on the left the ports that you want to forward uh, from one side to the other side. So you're going to have um, each one mapped, okay, and also you can define which network. Remember the networks that we put a name on the network and computer side. So you can make these relay rules specifically when being accessed from specific origins. Um, so this is what it is. Then the other, as I mentioned before, the other section we need to configure is the rules, and the rules will define which um, how the flow is going to be allowed or denied. Okay, so in our case, We are allowing traffic coming from the access networks to the private LAN and the private LAN to the access networks. Okay, we are allowing any traffic, ACMP, UDP, and TCP, uh, private LAN to access to public LAN to access. So those are the four flows we are allowing to happen, and this is the type of service that we are allowing. You can be as detailed and narrow as you restricted or narrow as you want. So let me, before we finish this session, let me show live a little bit more, at least for you to see how the options are used. In the rules, for example, you can create a rule and you can enable or disable the rule. The client, you can select from which network, and you can see that this is a pull down menu, and it's going to show you all the names of the network and computers that you created on the network section. Um, if you are talking about a VPN, a network that is connected via VPN, we're going to see this in one of the other sessions coming. Is the very last one. You can select which IPsec peer, etc. And the relays here. You can select which service. If you don't have the service that you want to um, authorize, uh, you can create the service here on this tag. You can create any service you want. You can discard, reject, or allow. You can define time frames where this rule applies. For example, you may want to create a time class that is just after hours, and you can put rules that only apply on after hours. Okay, so on the relays here, which is the listening side, which is the relay to address. Okay, you can select which interface, which port, IP address, a port. The IP address is going to be forwarded, right? Then you can say uh, port forwarding TCP, port relay TCP, um, semi-transparent TCP port forwarding, etc. There are several different ways to manage the relay. Okay, if you want more information, you can just press help here. Okay, and you're gonna see the definition. What is a TCP relay? What is TCP port forwarding? Semi-transparent TCP, UDP relay. You have all the different explanations. Okay, so here you can select from which network are you allowing this port forwarding. Also time frame, etc. So it's very complete. You can create very sophisticated rules here. So okay, so this will allow, for example, to provision the phones on HTTPS using HTTPS through the in-gate. Is remember that the in-gate is the NAT uh, device for the PBX, so the PBX will be able to interact with the phones via the SPC. Okay, so that's all for this session. Remember that if you have any questions or comments, send an email to trainingquestions@engage.com. We will be happy to answer, and I hope to see you in the next session. Goodbye.